All right, I get it. Wesley Chapel growing is kind of old news these days, but the hundreds of millions going into this area right now are super interesting. New Whole Foods announced, not to mention all the houses that are being built, new infrastructure plans, super interesting things. And let's get into not just why Wesley Chapel is growing, why it's popular, but how it's growing and how it could impact you if it's where you're gonna choose to live. One of the most interesting things to me about the Wesley Chapel area is that J.D. Porter holds the keys in so many ways. So Wesley Chapel, just like a lot of other cities, has the potential to grow a lot. There are some constraints around the outside. There's preserve on one side, there's a different county on the south side. So it can only kind of grow in a couple directions. But then because of how much of this land used to be owned by the Porter family, the Wiregrass Ranch, not the shopping area, but the original Wiregrass Ranch, this family, the Porter family, holds the keys to so much of how kind of the inside of Wesley Chapel gets developed. Now, personally, I don't think that's bad because I've heard a lot of interviews with him and read a lot of interviews with him, and I think he has some really unique opinions about why Wesley Chapel doesn't have to grow so fast. It doesn't have to have every amenity and duplicates of all those amenities. It doesn't need another grocery store or another movie theater or another shopping center. It needs things that the residents really want and will use. A lot of this has come through medical investments, which is very interesting. Now, Moffitt Cancer Center and Tampa General Hospital are always buying and investing in the suburbs and adding other facilities. Advent has a big facility in Wesley Chapel. Now a new hospital really took shape in an instant, Orlando Health, right there on US 56. And I do want to get into the areas where it is growing the most. On the south in kind of a unique way, and then on the north and east areas of Wesley Chapel. But before we get into that, a lot of you are not surprised that Wesley Chapel has been growing and developing, and you've seen a lot of videos like this about it. Wesley Chapel, if you're not in the area all the time, it changes quite a bit. My wife is probably over this way every 6 months, and it seems pretty different every single time. There's entire new buildings, entire new roads every time she's over here because she's not over here that much. Now, if you've driven through the area, there's construction all the time in all kinds of different ways. There's a major interstate that goes through the area. There's neighborhoods and roads and areas that need to be connected, and they're building a lot of that infrastructure, widening those roads, like Old Pasco Road. Like, they're widening these things that just can't handle the amount of traffic that comes to these areas. In areas like this, the Krate. The Krate won Development of the Year for the state from a couple different boards, and this is a really unique kind of development. It's built from 35 or so shipping containers that are all built into these little shops. I know we've talked about this development before, but it is really unique. And surprisingly, it is more of a destination than you would think. There's a stage for performances. There's a lot of different options. There's a lot of parking. Now it gets crazy on the weekends. There's parking here in between the containers, but then there's a big parking lot with like World Market and Best Buy and Ross and TJ Maxx and those kind of things right over there. So we're gonna talk about how it's growing on the south and on the north and east, and then we're gonna get into a couple questions from Reddit. So I went to Reddit to see what are people's biggest questions about the Wesley Chapel area, what comes up the most consistently, and we're gonna hit on that at the end. Pasco County, where Wesley Chapel is. Now, Wesley Chapel is not the biggest city in Pasco County by any means. It's definitely the most popular from the outside. But Pasco County has not had these two things that I think are very interesting. It hasn't had a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's until now. The plans just became public that there's gonna be a Whole Foods built right on Bruce B. Downs, just barely as you get into Pasco County, barely as you get into Wesley Chapel from New Tampa. Now, for the most part, who cares, right? But Whole Foods is an indicator of how high the average household income is in an area. The fact that there's one going right over there is not surprising at all. New Tampa, Wesley Chapel, even Land O'Lakes are really high household income suburbs for the Tampa area. So what's happening in the south is that it's getting filled in with nicer things. Now, almost in that area, a little further northwest, you have the Tampa Premium Outlets. Obviously, those are nice, but I'm not surprised at all to see this backfilling. This is like a Whole Foods, a Lifetime Fitness going right kind of the southwest corner of the Meadow Point neighborhood, right off Bruce B. Downs. You can see the preliminary drawings there. The final permits have been submitted, which means they have bids done, they have everything ready to go. One of my biggest questions with developing the south a bit more, filling in these areas, is similar to the main Reddit question, which we'll get to, but it's about infrastructure. Can the infrastructure handle the extra traffic? No, there's tons of traffic right there. It's just gonna compact that traffic really at the stretch between 56 all the way down to 275. That's just gonna get compacted a bit more as people are commuting in and out. Now there's a shopping destination in there like Whole Foods that is gonna be kind of an anchor for that area in another way. It can't handle the traffic right now. That's the biggest concern about this area. As everything keeps growing out further, there's still kind of these choke points that people have to go through. Now, some of those points could get a little wider. 301 could get wider, 41 could get wider. 589, which is kind of the west side of this area on the west side of Land O'Lakes, is part of that. We'll get to that when we talk about the north developments, but this southern development on the south side of Wesley Chapel, it's going to make traffic worse. That's going to be the biggest impact and the biggest thing probably locals are gonna fight and complain about and those kind of things. And based on Reddit, that's the number one thing. When people are moving to Wesley Chapel, they're asking, can the infrastructure keep up with the growth? They're also asking, like, what's it like to raise a family there? Now, the sentiment across Reddit is super positive for living in Wesley Chapel. Great place for schools, great place for creature comforts like this, and a great place to raise a family. So I said I was gonna do Reddit stuff at the end, but I guess I'm just gonna kind of put it throughout. Now, hitting on the north development stuff a little bit more, because that is one area that this overall area can grow. But let me be clear, a lot of the stuff that's north Wesley Chapel isn't actually Wesley Chapel. It's San Antonio, or it reaches over into Land O'Lakes a little bit. And that's kind of how these suburbs are. And there's areas that you think are Wesley Chapel, like the Tampa premium malls, that aren't actually in Wesley Chapel. They're in Lutz, because they're right at the corner of Lutz and Land O'Lakes and Wesley Chapel. And there's spots where all these suburbs kind of blend together. But just like many would think the Meadow neighborhood is actually in Wesley Chapel because that's kind of where it anchors to, it's actually in San Antonio. Now, there's this big stretch across the north side of Pasco County. So if you look at Highway 52, it kind of runs that top third of Pasco County. In between 301 and Veterans Expressway, which is 589, all the way to the west side of Land O'Lakes, we've had a lot of development happen along the south side of 52. Now developers, especially home builders, are buying big chunks of land on the north side of 52 and building big neighborhoods. You can see some of those right here that are on Land O'Lakes Boulevard, which is 41 and 52. That's also where a big Amazon fulfillment center is going. Infrastructure being built out here like crazy because there is so much space for it. There's a lot of space to fill in up here, with Pasco County being pretty low population compared to how much space is available, and still having so much preserved land. Now, people are always worried about Pasco County getting too congested. It's gonna feel congested over the next 10, 15 years if you're here for the growth. After that point, it's not gonna feel as congested because there is still a lot of preserved land. I know I bring that up a lot, 33% preserved in Pasco County. I'm curious what you think about all this growth. Now, some of it people perceive as good, some of it people perceive as bad because they don't want to be around, the construction and chaos and congestion. Other people like it because you get cool things like this. You get other really interesting neighborhoods that have a unique draw, that draw high income households that take more of the tax burden, that provide more tax basis points for that provide more tax revenue for all the roads and schools and things like that. But as we look at the growth, not just to the north, but to the east, it's growing out there as well. Specifically along Highway 301, or State Road 301, whatever that is, County Road, I don't know what it is. The problem with that area though is there's a preserve on the east side of that. And it's a big preserve, and not just one, there's a couple different ones. You have the green swamp, obviously, up to the north side of that, but there's a lot of environmental constraints out that way. One interesting thing with all of these developments is kind of the battle for a downtown. Wesley Chapel still doesn't really have a downtown. Now, Grove is trying to be that. Shops at Wiregrass kind of is, and there's, proposed new development behind the shops at Wiregrass where all those neighborhoods are. We talked about that in the past where they said there was gonna be another movie theater, another grocery store. People often thought that was gonna be a Whole Foods, but the square footage was actually too small for Whole Foods to do that. That one might be a Trader Joe's, who knows? But the battle for downtown is very interesting because over in Land O'Lakes, they're trying to build a downtown at the Angeline neighborhood. Then at Avalon Park, they're trying to build a downtown, which is taking forever. And then you have areas around big neighborhoods, like areas around Epperson where they have the big Crystal Lagoon, or Meadow with their big Crystal Lagoon, where you have this kind of pod of things that gets developed, where there's a Chick-fil-A and there's other shopping, but still not a place where you're gonna have like a big Christmas tree lighting event or things like that. That's what I think these suburbs need, is some kind of central downtown kind of area. So I'm curious your thoughts overall about Wesley Chapel, about the growth, about JD Porter and his hold on it, about all these different factors, about will there be a downtown, won't there be a downtown? All those kind of things are super interesting to me. I'm curious if they're interesting to you, and then what other things about these areas you'd like to learn more about. Hey, if you're serious about moving to Wesley Chapel or curious about any of these suburbs specifically, I'd love to hop on a Zoom call with your phone call, whatever. Give us a call, text, or email anytime. Our next step is typically to hop on a Zoom call and just process your situation, process the map and some listings, and kind of see where it all fits for you and see how we can best help. But as always, thanks for coming by.